I'm not trying to hook you on something. If you are not technical, you have never built an automation, you never used Airtable, then maybe this is too much for you. I will create maybe another video in how to use this tool. But on this video, we are really focusing and diving deep into the database, the interface, and some basic automations and how those things are connected with each other. Well, the interface is not a must. Technically, we can just work with the database and with the automation, and we can make everything run. But in order to keep it simpler for those who are not technical, I think the interface totally makes sense, because we can hide and really play and configure it into a more simplified way. Let's imagine you are not the one building. All you need is the interface. You can run the entire system inside your interface. If you are just the one using it, all you need is to understand the interface. Understanding the database and automation requires some technical skills. I'm not explaining how Airtable is working, nor I'm explaining how a script is working. But no worries, I will talk about those things in other videos. But here, I'm just giving you a grand overview of the entire system. I'm not trying to hide something. In fact, we are really going in depth. It will be a quite long and boring tutorial. Here we are at the interface level. And as we can see, we have two sections. On the one side, we have the film creating setup. And on the other interface, we have more on the settings like the prompts, inspiration, and media automations, which we will talk in a bit. But as of now, let's focus on the creation. To enter an idea, we can just use the form or just enter it from this view directly here. We can add a story. I've created a dummy script. Just reuse this one here for demonstration purposes. Let's just give it the same name, or let's just change it slightly so that we see also the difference here. Let's select the character, which by the way can be pre-trained. We will discuss this also later, but not as of now. We will select myself here, and of course the category we are working on. Based on the category, we have also different kind of prompts. So we can choose whatever category we want to work on. It can be a music video or just a narrative. Let's just select here the narrative for now, and we leave this blank. But if we select this little enhance button, that would trigger automatically the automation. So because I'm too lazy to write something, I'll just use an existing script here. It always depends on what input you give the system. The better the input, the better the output. It's obvious, but in some cases we just expect too much. It will not transform any bad input into something. Let's keep everything in a rundown, super simple, and then we go dive in to the details in a bit. As we can see here, we have the project. Let's just move the status for now into in progress so that we can see that we are currently working on this project. So to explain what's going on under the hood, let me just keep it as simple as possible by turning everything off, and we start from here. At the very top, clicking on this button, we can enhance the narrative, and that's all it's doing. It's just enhancing the narrative by creating the shooting board. But if we haven't enhanced the narrative, it will also not create any shooting board. Keep that in mind. Of course, we do not need to use any of those features, but we have to understand that those are triggered by specific fields. When we open, for example, the details, we have the narrative, but we do not have the enhanced narrative. Because of that, it will also not create any shooting boards. We do not need to enhance the narrative. We can also just copy the narrative here or just place the narrative directly here inside. Because the system is built around that, it would make totally sense to just enhance the narrative. Let's just press on yes. This takes usually about 5 to 25 seconds. But in the meanwhile, while it's rendering and it's doing its thing in the background, let's just discuss the settings. Here in the settings, we have selected from before the create a narrative. What does it mean? Here inside, we have the prompt. When we click on the prompt itself, we see the full-blown prompt. Some prompts are quite extensive. This one is quite simple, and this is more a general prompt, making it for everybody. Keep in mind, not every prompt applies to every possible scenario. You have to be quite specific. We define the prompt into those for items here. We have the role, like who should the AI play? We have the task. What should the AI do? We have an example output, and the more precise we are, the better here. And then we have the outcome. Now, in the outcome, we can also exclude really specific things we do not want the AI to do. That can be super helpful. We could name this one different here, but I think outcome is like something like a reminder, a conclusion, however you like to name it. And here, of course, we can also test the prompt, but we are not doing it. But we can open it and we can then type in any input here, test the prompt, and we see basically the raw response that we get. But let's just close it and let's go back to the narrative here, because that's what it's important. As we have done before, we have enhanced the narrative. We had this input, and this is now our output, the enhanced version. As I said, the input really dictates the output. We cannot expect that if we put some bad input that something great will happen. What's happening here is that we create also a summary. The summary is super important in every aspect. If we are too lazy to read the full narrative, then at least we should spend the time in reading the summary. If we, for example, want to create a music video, what we want here is to include the style and make sure that the style really is written down. Just give you an example. When I've created this example project here, I was not writing any style, and then it generated some random results which looked like this image here, which is looking decent, but every image was looking different from each other. But then when I imported and write in the summary, hey, we want all the colors to be gold and black, and only some other colors could be there muted, that's when the AI then started to understand like, every image must be black, gold, and that's like the main colors here. So that's why we have this unique style. You can integrate that, of course, into your prompt. As I said, you can open the prompt, change the details here, and then it will be generating something on your adjustments. Let's go back here to the Math Expert project. We have here pre-settings. We can change them. We can change the default character or style. We can choose another one. We can include, of course, other styles. I'll explain that later. But for now, this is all we need. We can change the category enhancement. Again, like those are the settings. We can always click on those. But if we think we are good to go, we can close the settings. We don't need those. We can, of course, also close the details. We can integrate also inspirations, but I'll keep this close for now. We have here a list really of hundreds of inspirational images which we can take, and that can also help to define the style. But I'll keep it close for now. Let's keep it close. And when we open the storyboard, we see nothing. Why? Because we haven't created yet the shooting board. Think about all those steps here, your task list. You want this task list to be empty. Don't see this as your collection of data. Really think about it as your task list. Step 1, keep in mind, if you are in step 1, what you want is an empty list. Here, the goal is not to have the list as full as possible, but rather make a decision, move on, or hide it. That's it. Let's go back here, and now we already can start in creating the shooting board. And it depends on what shooting board type we take. The short or the long, of course, is way faster, where we only have 10 images, and the long takes, of course, way longer. I want you also to keep in mind that while this is the story part, if your story is long, you might need to split your story into scenes. I'll discuss this also in a bit, but let's move on first to step 1. What you have to do here is to make a decision. So that means, do you like to process the information here? Yes or no? And you can hide the information, of course, by ignoring them, and it will trigger an automation. And with that, you can then move on to the next items. For example, on the live test, we can add a record quite easy. We can also write directly here inside and say on the shot description, let's say we do a live Zoom call. We can change the size, we can give it a name, or we can even open it and go from here and give it a title, Zoom call, and then the camera angle, like eye level, the character who's there in involve Theo, and that's basically it. But now after reading all the shot items, we are not happy maybe with some of those. In that case, we might ignore it. Let's just close specific items here and let's ignore them. What's happening is that they will be not here anymore. It takes maybe 5 to 10 seconds, but as we can see, the automation is kicking in, and one by one they will be changing the status, and that means they disappear here. Our goal at this stage is to make a decision: should we move on or should we keep it? We can of course trigger the automation here by just run with AI or run without AI, which we can show. We have here our shot list created already. As we remember, our title was the Math Expert, and we created the storyboard. And when we go here to the create image, let's close everything else and focus really on the Math Expert. We can of course set a filter here and really focus only on this one single project. By the way, this filter will not be saved. You do not have to worry about it. Once you leave the view, this filter will disappear as well. There is only this here at the top that will stay permanent. Here we can choose story and select the story we are working on right now. Focus just on one story, the Math Expert. Great. As I've mentioned, we have two options here, either the short or the long story. Here in the storyboard, where we have the list, we have now really those shots written in the most basic way. But this is not enough to create a good image. Therefore, we need first to take this here with the short summary from the story, create a good image description. In order to do that, let's show here the details. When we press on show open, this shot is connected with the story. We can open the story and have all the details here. We have the AI model, which it's default on Flux Pro version 1.1, which by the way, we can also change. We can talk about this on the automation stage. And then we have the prompt itself. Also, this can be enhanced. This is a quite extensive prompt already. Here we can enhance, of course, the entire prompt. This is like the prompt. We can play around with the input, and we can also test it, of course, like every other prompt. We can test it with the input, and we can test this with the output should we change something. What it's doing is like when we run it with AI, it first generates an enhanced image prompt, and then it's trying to create an image. Let's just run 3, for example, here, or you know what, let's just do 6. I haven't read those descriptions. We can, of course, also render everything at the same time. Yes, that would save time, but I think it's worth it to just read it if it really makes sense. Again, we can press render everything with one click. I believe if you manually try to understand every step and you do that a couple of times and improve the prompt over and over again, after maybe your 10th iteration, that's where you can really try to make it all automatic. But at this stage, it just makes no sense. What's happening here? We have now the enhanced prompt that was written while I was talking here. And we have the camera action 1, 2, and 3, which we can then use later for the video generation. After we have the enhanced prompt, it's then sending the automation this prompt here to create the image. And this is really important to understand. First of all, inside this character here, we have saved the unique ID, and based on that ID, it generates images where the character has been selected. Let's open this one as this is done. As you can see, this should be me. Is it good or not? That's up to you, but I think it's already a decent image here. But not every image, of course, will be good, especially if we are not reading if it makes sense or not. But this one looks okay. It's something with math. I haven't read the story, by the way. It was just a random story GPT gave me. Again, like if the input is not good, don't expect a good output, but I think it's decent already. We have here somewhere in the village. It looks also good. It's a medium shot. And should we change something? For example, we do not like this image. Let's try to change the image here. Let's just do a wide shot, and let's do here a wide shot, and okay. And then let's try to create a new image. This time it's taking not as long as before. Why? Because we already have the enhanced prompt. Keep in mind that when we change this one here, then it's not automatically changing the enhanced prompt. As you can see, the image is quite similar because we need to manually change it here, or we need to redo the prompt enhancement. Maybe weird, but that really allows us, because sometimes the prompt is good and it's just like the model did not understood it. Therefore, we can change here the selection, wide shot, but in order really to change it, we need first to redo the prompt here, to redo the enhanced image prompt. As we can also see, we have here always the automation status. So instead of a medium shot, we have now a wide cinematic shot. Let's see if it's working. Again, maybe it doesn't make sense at all, but let's see if it's better this time. As we can see, it's starting to generate already the image here. It's just loading up the image. Here we go. We have the image. We can, of course, look into it. Of course, we do not need to use the AI enhancement here. We can also run it without the AI enhancement. What it's then doing, it's just taking the shot description with the framing, the camera angle, and the camera movement. And if we like, also the camera speed, but this is optional. We can then see here the status is not selected. We can, and this is like a preference choice. We can say, okay, this is approve, or we just leave it for now. And then when we create a video, we know already that because we created a video, then it will automatically change the status that this completion might be in the video loop, okay? Because right now, this part here is where we have to decide to create the image, yes or no. Sometimes there is like an error going on, for example, on this one here, not really sure what happened here. And that can be like a timeout error. I will check into this later, but it actually worked 99%. Let's just create a new one in the meanwhile. Let's check later on what happened here. Let's move on and make sure that we can then start to create the videos. And this stage, I've also turned off the filter and I've included any possible clip here, but you also want to make a decision. As I've said, it would be great to understand the philosophy here. That means like those are not buckets where we want to store as many items as possible. No, it's the opposite. We want to clear them out. That really means emptiness. Filter things out. I'll explain this also. For step 2, we have to make a decision on what items we would like to keep and what items or what images we would like to transform into videos. As mentioned, I haven't set up any pre-filters here, and that's on purpose so that we can really see any impact we are doing. Let's just filter it and add the condition to the project. In this case, let's just do based from our shooting board, and it contains expert because that's the project. We can see here some duplicates because I have just created alternative versions to really showcase that the prompts are actually doing here a decent job. As we can see, they are quite similar. That really means that the prompts themselves are quite effective. Again, they are not adjusted and the input might not be good here. Therefore, the images are looking like R without any heart and soul, but this is totally fine for this demonstration purposes. Let's move on to this image, and let's say we are quite happy with this image here, and we can see already that they suggested from the step before some camera action interactions here. Of course, we can also change it. In our case, let's just choose maybe this one here, camera action 2, and sometimes it depends really also on the model. Sometimes less is more, and sometimes you want to be more specific. In our case, since our default model is Kling, we want to reduce it as it tends to be better if the prompt is quite simple. Let's just take everything out here. That's unnecessary. From 50 feet, we have a degree arc around the situation here. Let's just create a new video. We can change that, of course, but I leave it blank, and you cannot also deselect this one here unless you are going into the automation settings and make it harder, as this is clear the most expensive step. You have to make a clear decision here on what your default model is. Make sure that this decision is thought out. But of course, we have here another option, in our case, runway. But keep in mind, Kling half the price of runway. Yeah, therefore, that's our default model. And also, it takes around 5 minutes to generate the image. As we can see here, the automation has not yet updated this one. Why? Because when we go here to automation number 2, it takes first and write what has been there before. When we update it again, it now takes here what prompt we gave it here. Keep in mind that this prompt will be submitted for Kling. Everything else are just options. You can, of course, also add comments for yourself or for some team members. Say, yeah, this was working or not. And of course, you can also add some comments on the image. You can click on it and say, okay, let's render this, but more focus on that. Let's just move on. Let's just create our first videos. We can either press this button here and now wait, or move on to the next image. We can also see on the yellow color here that it's like processing. And again, this takes some time. In the meantime, let's move on to this image here. Let's see what we have. A crane shot. This is good. Ground level, blah, blah, blah. Let's just take this one here and we are running it. Great. When we move to the very last step, let's just say we went from image to image, disapproved and approve it. We want to check our videos. Here, same thing. If we do not have pre-filters, we can then add a condition here. And let's just add a story here. No video has been generated, therefore we cannot change any story here. This was like from another test project. And we can see we have here all the videos that has been generated in the past. And here we can see all the videos that has been generated in this table, basically, like all the different videos. Let's just check some other videos that has been generated. In the meantime, we are waiting for the videos. Let's go here. We can see this is also quite simple. We can give it a rating and then filter it later on really the best ratings. Should we have, let's say, 200 items, because the project is quite big, it would make sense then to rank them based on the rating. But let's just have a look, for example, on this image, how the video was looking like. The video is quite simple, but for this purpose, for this project, this is exactly what we need. This one would be a good, I would give it a 4 out of 5. Let's check maybe the other. Let's do a quick check on this video here, even though this is not the project we have been working on. Okay, it's also decent. The movement is okay. Exactly what we have been asking for. This one also 4 out of 5. We can then also approve it. And that's basically when we can then filter or create a new section for all the approved videos. I'm showing you how we can modify the settings here, that in any case, you can, of course, make it also more adjustable to your liking. When we move here and deselect preview, let's just create a new tab. We can add, it's super easy by just pressing here a new tab. We can add a filter here, and here inside we can choose any field, in this case video status, approved. And here let's just give it a name, approve. Let's save it. The only reason why I'm showing it is to go here into our videos. They are still rendering. Let's just wait some seconds here. Probably 2-3 minutes has been passed. And since we have now our first video images or video items, we can, of course, start to filter this one as well. In our case, let's just filter it by story. Select the math expert here. We can review those videos here and of course give them a rating as well. Let's just give this video here a rating after reviewing it. It's working, but it's not really good. The movements are not perfect. Let's give it a 2 and let's move on to the next. It's decent, but also not really great. Let's give this one a 2 as well. Let's move to this video here. A pen from left to right. It has some, the video itself is decent, but because of those mistakes, I would say I would give a 3 out of 5. If we would have more videos, we can then start to improve them or disapprove them. Again, our goal here is to empty the board and make a decision here. This one still needs a decision, and either we disapprove it, let's just say we want to hide it, or we approve it, and then it will also disappear. Let's just approve it, and the same goes here, approve, and also approve. Again, like just for testing purposes. And that's what we want here, an empty board. Of course, now we have here the collection of all approved items, which we can then also filter, sort, group however we like, based on projects or on the progress of the projects. But this might be already too technical from this point on without understanding the basis and how everything's working. And from here on, of course, we can then start to build other automation. For example, everything that has been approved will move into a Google Drive folder, which is quite easy to do, but we will not talk about this since we will focus really on the story creation part here. Let's discuss quite fast the utility before we move on to the database. And that's actually quite simple. We have here our characters, and those characters, as we saw before, we have here myself. This is trained based on those images here. Only a couple of images to showcase basically what we can do here. And we can see like the images that has been created with this character. For example, as we remember this image here for rebuilding the school. Great. And here we can then see like this image here was basically with a video attached, and we can see here the video URL. I'm also explaining the relationships between those items. Again, like from the outside world, this might look complicated, but actually this is quite simple to understand. And this here, this is basically why I built the entire workflow, is because we wanted to create documentaries, and based on this style here, which we worked on before, and then we trained the model to create those images here. And I think those are turning quite good out. That's exactly the style we want for our documentary channel. And here we can then start really to train more and more the model. We can add more and more characters and styles. It really depends on what you like. And you can do the settings here inside. I have not included any crucial like base ID settings, anything that you should change, because for that you need to go into the database. Here you can just change like the basic information, for example, the characteristics. That also is like giving the style. This influence also the prompt. Again, I'll talk about that in the database section. Here we have all the text prompts, and the beautiful thing is, of course, we can change the models super easy. We can really go and look for the perfect model, DeepSeek, O3, you name it, whatever model you like, you can change it here. And not only that, but you can test them also. You have here the prompt, but then if you want to change, let's say the prompt here of this prompt, you can go and show the testing. Then we can add here an input and we get the output here. Let's say we want to test this prompt here, a story about some streamer who got famous. Let's test the prompt here. And when we press on test prompt, for that we need to wait. In the meantime, we can then try to understand what's going on here. We can also include more details, like what is the script we are using, explaining the script. But this is already super technical here. I'll discuss this in the automation section, but I'll hide it for now. The great thing here about this one is we can integrate the comments here, and we can play around with the prompts and do versions. That means while we do the prompt testing, because the prompts are really the core of everything here, like image generation, video generation, if the prompts are not good, then the images or the videos will not be good as well. Really, the prompt is the core of everything, and understanding that is crucial. Move on here. Let's say we want to document our second outcome, and we can create here a second and reply under the second. This will keep everything nice and organized. We have here the summaries. The narrative follows Alex. passionate streamers, exactly what we wanted. But again, keep in mind, if the input is shit, the output will be shit as well. But let's just copy it and I'll add it here. And now we can start really to enhance the prompt and make our tweaks here. I have already integrated here quite some really extensive prompts. For example, when we look into the shooting board, we can see that this prompt here really is quite a long prompt with a lot of instructions, examples, and therefore this also takes quite a long time to process, because keep in mind not only that the AI has to process all the input here, but in addition to that, we have also the inspiration if we include the character that we include, and of course the enhanced narrative. This is quite an extensive prompt that the AI needs to process, and that usually also takes some time. Anyway, we have then here under media automations, like the current media that are running, and here you can add more. And of course, under inspiration, we have then here a bunch of images that we can use as inspiration. I'll also include that in a template. We can filter it, and you can also easily include your own inspiration here, and the AI will then do, based on the image, in-depth analysis. We can filter it here by, for example, whatever color, and let's say we want the color yellow in it. And now it's looking for images with yellow items. We only have the Flux images that has been generated with Flux that contains somewhat of yellow here. As we can see, we can start to really dig in and look for the example, or let's just show another one. Let's say we want, that's the inspiration, and that's basically all we need. When we talk about the database and the automation, that's actually only if we really want to customize. But once we set this up, that's all we need. That's all the editor need in order to really process everything here. And I can also show like 2-3 projects that we have done. Example, this dummy music video here, where we had those like images created by the AI. And of course, like when we go here, we can also check the videos or the images that has been processed. As I said, sometimes it is way better to divide like the story into sub-stories. If the narrative is too long, for example, we are currently working on a documentary about the gambling addiction, and one part of it plays inside a casino. That whole part can be then written down here, and then based on a summary, we generate those images here. And as we can see, we have here the faceless character as our default character here. Now, before we move into the database, let's just talk about how the structure is in terms of story generation and why this has been created that way. I know that was just a simplified explanation, but we have to understand, why aren't we just creating one table where we include everything, like the storyline, the images, the videos? Why not just do it in one table? The answer is quite simple. In some cases, for example, when we create a story and we want to separate those shot lists into single items, that's quite clear. But I think it's even more clear if we want to add more items that are related to the story. If you have never worked with a relational database, that might be confusing at first, but makes totally sense. Think about this. When you have one shot list item and you render one image, and now you are not happy with this image, let's just say you disapprove this image. And like working with AI is not always the best results. Therefore, you might want to render another image, and this one is also disapproved. And now you want to render a third image, this is approved. But do you really want to get rid of those images? No. You want to keep them as a backup should you really get nothing better. Those images relates to the shot item, and the shot item here from the shot list relates to the story. There is a relationship between those items. And the more extensive we are doing it, the more sense it makes, because then it's easy to get really the items we are looking for. If we put everything in one database, it's hard to filter and to really get that what we are looking for. Imagine you have one table and you would write all the information in this one column here. And if you write down like this image was disapproved, this image was approved, this image was disapproved, and now you want to filter it. If you have one item here that is disapproved and another approved, how can you filter it to images that are just approved? You need to go one level. Therefore, you want a relation that then creates from the shot list several images. You could, of course, go on and let's just say for the next shot list item, you are happy with only one image. That's like a lucky shot because you are happy with those two images. You can then start to create videos. And this is, again, really important to understand here that those videos are in relation to the images and the images to the shot list and the shot list to the story. We can, of course, extend this and discuss this further. I think at this point, the basic concept should be somewhat clear. But when we talk about inside the database itself, and when we talk more about the technical things, it will be even more clear why this makes sense. Let's start talking about the database. As we can see, we have here just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 tables. There is actually an extension which is quite helpful to make you understand how those tables are related to each other. In order to do that, you can just open the extensions tab. Now you just need to go to base schema, add that, and we can see everything in the ground overview. This might look complex, but actually this can be super helpful in understanding how really every table is connected with each other. While this is loading, let's just go and visualize it in a more simplified way. As we have discussed before, those are our main tables, but there is actually more going on. For example, every prompt and every image generation provider is stored in our external automation. This is connected to everything, to the story, to the shot list, to the images, to the videos, but also to the credentials. This is the backbone of everything. Then we have the characters. This is also connected to the story, to the shot list, but also to the external automations. Why do we separate those bases? This is not about explaining Airtable and how Airtable is working, rather understanding just how this template is set up here. We will discuss every table here. And after we have discussed every table, we will also create one new table with the help of AI. Let's go back. This is the base schema. Again, this might look quite complex and overwhelming, but we can really start to pull in like the stories table here and can see how this is related to the shooting board, for example. We can see that here inside the stories table, we have this one here, the shooting board, which is connected to the story. We can really see how things are connected with each other. Inside the shooting board, we can then see like what moves basically here to the images and try to understand how things are related to each other. Again, for someone seeing that the first time, this might look overwhelming, but when you spend 2 to 5 minutes on it, it really helps you to understand how things are connected. This can be super helpful. We will not spend much time in analyzing each field here, rather to give you a ground overview here. For someone who has never worked with Airtable before, this is again not a tutorial. I'll just a brief overview what's going on here. We have on the side our different views for the tables, but I'm not spending too much time in defining those views. It's rather to give you a starting point that you can then define those views, but it's better to spend more time in the interface itself and to play around with the views over there, because at the end of the day, that's also where you want to use your entire production pipeline here. Here on the side, you can easily create a new view here, and the views are of course only helpful if you also create filters. For example, when you have this view here under drafts, you can start to create a filter. For example, every inside this view has a condition where the status is in progress or is in backlog and in progress. We can then select is any of in progress and in backlog. Everything here is in progress and in backlog. Again, those are dummy projects to just demonstrate like what we can do with this template. We can see the bases sometimes have a lot of different fields, but most of the time we do not need all those fields. In fact, we can really hide most of the fields here. I would also recommend, in order, if you want a specific view, to hide everything and only like enable everything that is important to this view. For example, when we are working in drafts mode and when we want to see like what storyboards are currently in progress, do we really need all the automation fields? Do we really need like the relationships? No. What we want to see is like the status. We want to see the narrative itself, of course. Like, what is this all about? We want to see maybe the enhanced narrative. What else could we be interested in? That's basically it. We can, of course, always add more fields to it. The goal here also is to keep it as clean as possible. You can start to move things around here. You have the narrative, you have the enhanced narrative. But let's just say you want to have it even cleaner. Let's just take out the narrative here. And now we just have the enhanced narrative. We can go to all the projects, change the view here. We can just pull in all the projects that are currently in progress. We can, of course, always extend also the status here. This is in progress, but maybe I want something between in progress and done. And we can call it drafts, for example, or maybe between backlog and in progress. And let's just call this one here drafts. And since none has an icon, we can just create here, change the color to light green and make this here maybe a bit darker. We have just added a new status here. And let's just make, for example, our project here that we have worked on drafts. And now we change the filter here to drafts. Or we can also make drafts and in progress, and we can then group them by the status. We have a pretty clean view here. We can see we have the drafts. We have everything that is currently in progress but not done. This is, again, not our view where we want to spend time in working. You can, of course, but for someone like new to Airtable, this database view is most of the time quite overwhelming, and you rather want to give them access to the interface because this is also where they cannot destroy things. What I mean with that is when we talk about automations, the problem is that once we change, for example, any field names, that might have an impact on automations. When we change it in the interface, let's just say here in enhanced narrative, when we go here and change, for example, the name, and let's just say we give it another name here, we see this one here, we just changed the name, but inside the database, even though this is the enhanced narrative, the name stays the same. That means even if someone changes the name inside the interface, the database structure itself remains the same. Only if you really changed the name here and make an edit inside this option here, then you will change it. But again, I would not recommend to change anything because things are really related to each other. Let's just put this name here back. This is how you can change your views, adjust your views here. Really, the goal is to hide things, hide fields as much as possible. You have all those fields, but they are really not as important in most of the cases. Let's talk about the story and how this is structured here. When we go just to all stories and we have enabled, we can start to arrange the fields here. What I would always recommend is like everything that needs a decision, especially, for example, the prompts, the shooting boards, I would move those items to the left. You can, of course, move things like dragging them here inside the table view. But what I would recommend is when you go to hide the fields, you can start to move items here. Let's just rearrange now this view here to give it a more structurized approach here. After moving specific fields here, the way I've arranged it is that everything that needs a decision, I've put here in front. Everything that is just there, for example, to trigger specific things or like any formula fields, I've tried to hide them, as most of the time they are not really useful, or they are useful, but we don't need them every time. Now, when we close this one here, we can see we have here a short summary, and we can see in one glance we have the category, we have the shooting board prompt, we have the default characters. Here we need to really put a decision. Of course, we have our default category shooting board that's baked into the automations and systems, but here we can really change that also. We can see here the status. We can see like every item that is related, the shooting board items here that is related to the story. We can see also, did we have enhanced it? Did we create already the narrative, the story, and so on. After like understanding, story is really the core, and that's where everything is built up from. This is the foundation that triggers basically everything for the shooting board. And again, here we just have text, no image generation. And the way this is set up looks quite similar to the interface, but here we have a lot of fields that are not really in the interface because they are not important. For example, what do we have here? We have a relationship with our story. The shooting board here is related to the story. And this is really important to understand because this relationship allows us to pull data coming here from the stories. What we want is the summary here. For the math expert, we want the summary inside this shooting board. How we do that is by creating a relationship here between this shooting board and the story. And what we want to do is we want the summary here from the stories board. Again, when we click on this one, this is a lookup field where we select the source, that is the story, and which field we want to display here is the summary. This is super helpful because we do not need to change anything here inside, like one by one, because it's always the same story. Imagine you would have everything in one table. And now you want to do changes. Because it is related, we just have to change it here. Let's just do one test. Let me copy this one here and take this out. Instead, we just write down test. Because we change this summary here into test, we can see that everything has applied here on the lookup field. This is super helpful because you can really pull data from different fields, which makes it super simple to change everything in just one table, and that will apply to every other table. Let's just put this back. As we can see, we have here the summary. This is really important to understand because, as I've mentioned earlier, the prompt enhancement here is written in a way that it pulls the data from the shot description, the attributes, the character, and of course the short story. The same goes and applies, of course, for the character. When we have a relationship here in our shooting board with our character, we can select it. For example, maybe this shot here is not related with Theo. We can just deselect Theo, and now this will also disappear. And what happens is, because we deselect this one, when we enhance, the prompt knows also that there is no character involved. That means it's not writing or using the trigger word Theo in the enhanced prompt. Again, this is not the view we want to work on. I just want you to see that we have here way more fields that are connected, which are not visible in the interface. The interface should be as clean as possible. And here we can see that we have a lot of relationships where we pull the data really from not just the character name, but for example, the characteristics, that when we change the characteristics here, it again applies to every single Theo related character field here. When we look further, we can really see that we have connected quite a large amount of fields here. In its core, it's actually quite simple. Here, our mission is to approve the shot items, that they move on to the images. This is the goal. Here we just pull every information that is either important for the interface or just important to run the automation and trigger it. Now that you have the overview of basically how to set up your views and like why we use relational fields, I'm now doing a breakdown of each field. That might be boring and not really sure if you need this, or if you just want to do your own version, that's totally fine. But anyways, I'll just break it down. Most of the time you want here on your very first field a formula field. In this case though, we don't really need it. But in other tables, we have a formula field, especially like with a shot ID. That means the formula is looking something like this here, where we have some repeating system that where every shot has a unique number, where we know to what film it belongs and is this here a shot or an image or a video clip. But in our stories, we don't really need that here, as I believe every story itself is like in a way unique. Not that the items here are not unique, but what I'm trying to say is that here inside the stories, you might have an overview of all your stories, while in the other fields, it might get lost in creating all those repeated items. You have the narrative. This is the field we used as the input field from our interface, as you remember from before. Here we just have the narrative itself. Here we choose the categories, what prompt it is. By the way, I have filtered this one here. This is not just a link relationship, but this is also filtered. And when we have here under the prompt category, this is filtered only by narratives. That means like we can select only a couple of fields here. We do not have access to every single item that is existing here, but only to really the narrative prompts. As we can see here, we have like interview, music videos, narrative, commercials, animations, but we do not have access to the image models and so on. That filtering makes a lot of sense to limit it down so that you likely will also do less mistakes on the process later on. This here is just a trigger button, not really doing anything, but once you press this one, it starts a trigger, which we will talk about in the automation section. The raw response is that what you get as a raw response from your AI providers. In our case, our AI provider was Strico, and this is basically how the response is looking if you do not filter or if you do not extract the information in a specific way. This is like really the raw response, and I'll explain that also in the automation section. But what we can see here inside of content, we have a type, and this one is formatted in the summary. Here we have the summary, and then we have the story, and this is like the enhanced narrative here. And we can see here in a humble village, blah, blah, blah. This is just the raw response because sometimes the AI is not doing what it's supposed to do. So in order to get anything, we captured the raw response here and of course extract the information here on this field. Here we have the enhanced narrative. This is like where the full narrative is then going. And here we can then start to create the storyboard. It's also a trigger field. We can also select what prompt we want to use in order to create the storyboard. Here, the same thing, we limit it to shooting board. In this case, we just have 2 prompts because in my case, in my use case, I just use those 2 prompts and they are most of the time good enough for my use case here. We just have create shooting board small or create a normal shooting board. Here we have the relationships between the stories and the shooting boards. We then look up the images from the relation. Inside our shooting board, we have a relationship with the images. We pull here from this shooting board the images, and this is what is visible here. That we can see when we open this one here, inside the shooting board, we see the shooting board images coming from those images. Confusing, but I think once you understand the relationships, it makes totally sense. But again, this is not a video explaining Airtable in its core. The same goes for video files. This is the same principle. We pull the information from the shooting board, which is related to the video files here itself. Therefore, we do not need another relationship field, for example, for video files. We can really pull everything here in the shooting board. And to demonstrate that, let me just draw it. That's more understandable here. Okay, while the story is the core of everything, in terms of database hierarchy, I would say the shot list itself, or in our case, I call it shooting boards, is like the centerpiece of everything. Why? Because the story, when we visualize it this way, it goes into one direction here. It generates shot list items, but shot list will generate images, and those images then generate videos. But the items are connected to each other in a way that it pulls the information here, and the same goes, of course, the other way around. That means we know exactly, like, this video belongs to this image, and because this image belongs to this shot, we have already a relationship here. And therefore, we do not need to connect the image here. For example, we could also create a relationship of the story with the image, but this is not necessary anymore because we have the shot item here already, and we can pull every information from this table to all the other tables. This one here is really this piece of everything. Again, like when we talk database-wise. That means here we can then look into the shot list item and pull the information from the image directly. We look into the shooting board, and because of that, we have all the information here. Like we have the image, we have the videos that we can then reference here in this table. That's the same for all the URLs. And of course, we can also integrate an image count. This is not a must. It's not doing anything. It's just like counting how many images we produced already for this project. For this one, 112, for this one, 7, and so on. We can do the same for anything you would like to count on, but I think in this case, that's fine enough. This one here, the creation date, also super important because it's which you can then use for formulas. You can set a timer. If this has been created at this time, wait 5 minutes before you do this. So I'll explain it also in the automation part. This one here, the automation phase, is like just your status, not in terms of is this project done or not, but that you see what's going on in the automation phase. So that you have always a live update. What's going on, and did we start anything here? Yes or no. Those fields here for the interface. So even in this view, I would recommend to select those here as they are not doing anything for the database itself. They do not serve anything. They just serve as a filter. So what I've done here and why we created this, let's just go to the interface. And when we go here to visibility, we have this filter saying show it only if this is marked as good, or if you have this check on enabled. And there is, of course, like another filter, but yeah, you can adjust this one also. In my case, the filter is if there is none item in the shooting board, don't show it, because why would we show an empty storyboard? Wouldn't make sense. Again, the goal is always to keep it as clean as possible here. That's the only purpose. Therefore, those here are not triggering anything. They are not doing anything besides the filter. Here we can deselect those, but just to showcase why they are here, we can then hide those fields. The status, as the name says, is just like a ground overview of what's going on in this project, at what stage it is. The default character here, as already discussed, is like the default character, which we have also a lookup field where we can then see like the description of the default character. Sometimes you can write a more extensive, for example, here we have the characteristics also. We do not have a face, but it's more about the style itself, because the model has been trained on this specific style here. Here inside, we then can integrate also the inspiration. Keep in mind that this view here is not arranged or sorted. That's something which we have done here on those other views. It's just here to showcase really every single field that you understand, like for what each field is. Here in inspiration, we can take any inspiration. Let's just go here into this project and select one of those fields here. And let's just say we want to use this one. This was also used in the music video. Okay, what it's doing also, we take the shot description of this inspiration and we send this one here also in the input for the enhanced narrative. This one will be used also to enhance the narrative if we have inspirations, but this is not a must. Inspiration prompts or image descriptions are sometimes quite extensive. Therefore, you can also select description or the long description, but the long description are quite extensive. When we open this one here, for example, we can see that this is describing the image. And keep in mind, the more accurate we are in describing the image, the better the results. Or here, just another example. This was like the input image. It generated like a long description here. And based on that, this image was generated here. Quite decent. Again, we just take the short description, but if you prefer to have the long description, it's quite easy to change. You can just add a lookup field and look for the long description. But in our case, it's too much information here. We have, as I said, like the short description that allows us really to include more like inspiration so that the AI really gets a feel of what we want, especially when we talk about style here. The next item is the task ID shooting board. Most of the automation, in fact, everything is running inside of Airtable, but sometimes the automation hits the limit of 30 seconds because it just takes longer. For that, I'm using a software called Windmill, which we will discuss also in the automation. And it's creating a task ID. The same applies also if you use the other models like Flux, Kling, whatever. The task ID is basically just an ID that your task is being processed. You store this value. Once it's done, you take this value here and say, hey, is my task done? If your task is done, you have the ID of the task and then you get the result. Then you have also the last modified field and one last formula field. The formula is looking like this here. You can do a screenshot and basically ask GPT to rewrite it for you. Here, the only thing that it's saying is like, hey, if 5 minutes has been passed after the creation date, then just write ready. That's it. All those items been accomplished. That's why this is empty. This one here is also saying if the shooting board itself is containing something, like this one here, shooting board, is not empty, or if it contains something, then keep it blank because we know that the task is done already. Again, like this here is just like for Airtable, we can use it as a trigger so that when this here writes ready, then Airtable triggers and to get the task from the automation. We have the other options here, which we can hide as well because they are not serving anything. They will not be useful for our database view here as they serve only as a filter for our interface. Let's just hide those here. We have discussed all the tables here. Let's move on to the next table, shooting board. We have the shot ID, which is, I have this formula here. Here, I have already the ID, but this formula contains the ID and the story. Which story does it belong to? And then we have a title, which is coming from AI. We can change it, of course. Like here we have also unique numbers, but they are not reflected here in the shot ID. I tend to have a real unique number here because, of course, like sometimes your story starts with a shot 1, then shot 2, and then you have a new story and it's also start with shot 1 and shot 2. You have like in numbers that are not unique anymore. Therefore, we are really following here it with a unique ID, and we can be sure that each item here is also unique. We have a title, shot description, framing, camera angle, camera movement, camera speed, character, as we have discussed, then a lookup field of the character name, because that's also important for the prompt, the characteristics, the summary of the story. This here, really important, it's triggering, again, we will discuss this also in the automation part, it's triggering AI to write the image prompt based on the information here on the left side. Same thing, either with inspiration or non-inspiration. We can also have here the inspiration and it reference the flux image. Let's say we want the same. We can take this here and we can see the reference image here. Once we build like an extensive inspiration database, it allows us really to be also faster with our workflow. Again, like this system is built for you to scale, and especially like with your inspiration and having all in one database, it makes a lot of sense. Inside the inspiration, what we care about, of course, is not the image, because we can't do anything with the image. The image is just for us to see, was the prompt good? It's like a check. Is it good or not? Is that what I'm looking for? But what's more important here is the long description this time. Why do we have the long description here? I believe the long description makes it easier for the AI to understand how really we want the shot to be. Like if we have a specific inspiration in mind and we want to transform it with our own vision here, then we do not need the short description, because before the goal was to integrate as many short descriptions or as many inspiration as possible for the single image. There might be some use cases where you want to integrate more, but I think it performed the best if you really integrate just one single inspirational image so that it has a feel what you want. And then it can start to write it quite detailed and the results will be pretty good. You can really load a lot of styles. It can be a reference of architecture, surfaces, whatever you have in mind. Maybe you want to have a glass character here and do not want to write down all the aspects of it. You just let AI analyze the image, take the style of this glass character and give it here. Again, one item would be more than enough in this case. And that's why the lookup field is also a long description here. We have the storyboard references. This is just a reference to the storyboard images where we can pull the images here. And if there is a video file or not, we can also pull the video files with the URL. We can see here the enhanced prompt where we have the extensive prompt. Again, we can always adjust our initial prompt to generate prompts. And then we have camera direction and action. That's for sure something I'll need to change, because most of the time the simpler the better here, and that's something too complex. Like most of the prompts coming from those suggestions are way too complicated. They need to be simplified and the results will be also better. So just a simple dolly move in, dolly move out, and then we have here also better suggestions. We have here the status as well. Again, like those are not arranged, and that's on purpose, right? But what you want here is to arrange that also, again, like by clicking here on hide fields, and you can just arrange everything that needs a decision. I would put really at the front so that those are the decision points. Everything that just reference something, I would put at the back here, because only if you want to look into the reference themselves, I would put them into the back. But let's move on here. We have run without AI. That means, as explained before, it's running the automation, triggering the automation, but not based on this enhanced prompt here, but based on those fields here, shot description and all those attributes. This ignore field is also doing nothing. It's just there to make sure that this item is not visible in the interface. So in this case, especially like in the database case, we do not need it at all. We can hide that one, as we try not to work in the database view here, but in the interface view, which is really way more flexible and you can design it the way you like. Let's just ignore this one. This is just the record ID. In some cases you need that, but we can also deselect this one here. It's important for automations, but in our daily use case, we do not need that. So we hide this one. By the way, it's also quite easy to do a formula to display your record ID. It's just you type in record ID here, and that's it. Let's hide this one. The image prompt enhancement, that's basically just the prompt to write this here, okay? So to enhance the image prompt itself. When it comes to the image prompt, it's connected here to the external automation field. Same goes for the default image model, which is also connected to the external automation field. Again, those are decision points. I would probably move them to the left here. Let's just move the items here. Maybe after the main information here, I would rank it this way. Those are really the core items. Then the default model here, we have this ranking here. We have the status. We have the story with a description, title, and so on. And everything which is not really important, we can move here, down here. We can see this is looking already way better. We do not have any completion status because we haven't worked on that. It's just for demonstration purposes here again. We can change the character, we can change the prompt, we can change the model, etc. And of course, we can also see the reference. But once this system is understood, we can actually hide those items here in this view, as we don't really need that. Once we have the decision on who the character is, we do not have always to see the characteristics of the character or the character name. Those are important fields, but not in your daily use case. Okay, therefore, you can really hide those fields. Again, it's way cleaner. Inspiration, maybe you want to leave it because you want to see what was the inspiration again. That's why the prompt was crap or good or whatever. Let's move on. Here we have the storyboard images. Again, sometimes one shot can contain multiple images here, and we have then all the images that have been created here in one table. And it's up to you what you want to do with those images, because of course, should you have way too many images, you do not want to use Airtable as your main storage, but rather as your decision database. And make sure that you save those images with an automation also directly into your Dropbox. That has been approved. The same thing here. We have a formula as our primary field. Same concept. We have here image, then the ID, and starts with 00 basically, that it looks a little bit nicer. And always have 3 numbers here. Again, should we reach the point where we surpass that, that's totally fine. It's just counting on. This table is way simpler. That's one good thing. It's not as complicated. The other 2 tables here, we have the image itself. Then we have the image URL from the provider file. But at the same time, we have saved that also here. The attachment field has one advantage. We can comment here inside the attachment field. In the interface, you can comment and be really specific. Let's just say, you click on the image here and you do not like this little boy, you can comment here, move him. That's quite nice that you have this option here, and that is also working for videos. You can also download it, the clip here, but that's basically just for references. I would always use the image URL for processing because this is like the full quality you get from the provider. And I'm not sure if Airtable is applying any compression. Therefore, I would always use the full URL. If you like, you can also upscale the image first. I have also an automation. We have the upscaled image here. We have a lookup field from the title, from the related shot here, so that we see what is the title again. Not important, definitely not, but we can see it here. Then we have the task ID, and that's important. Like, we do not need the task ID for the images. Most of the time it's fast enough. Like, it can handle it in one batch. We send it and it's done within 10 seconds or 15. But like sometimes it's failing. It's 99% working, but in some cases it's failing. Therefore, you want to capture the task ID and have a fallback option where you say, hey, you know what? It has been 5 minutes. Here we can see that was the error that we had earlier. We have the task ID. We can create a field that is a formula field and say, if the item here is not there, then look please again. And here is the task ID. In that case, the image was processed already. but there was something with Airtable. Not really sure what went wrong there, but again, it usually really works all the time. We have the relationship with the shooting board, of course. We have the relationship from the shooting board. This here is the story, but it's not a direct relationship to the story. It's more like a relationship from the shooting board to the story here. The shot details, shot type, camera type. Why is this also important? Because sometimes you want just to reference here and you do not want to click. For example, if you want just to have the shot details, you do not maybe want to click inside to look at the shot details here. You want them to be represented here for any automations or anything. I have here the shot detail, shot type, camera angle, and then the story summary, which by the way, we can also close because we have the story summary here already. Let's just delete this field here. You can use this one here like a feedback field. It's up to you. No, I'm not sure if I'm using it myself, but I'll leave it for now and I'll decide later on if that's useful. The ID, that's definitely a field we can hide. As I can see here, I have done a little mistake. And then we have, of course, the finished videos with the URL and the status if they are done. This is like the automation phase. And here also a trigger field to create the video. Should we be happy with the image or we ignore it? Again, like this is doing nothing for our database. Let's hide this one here. And this here also quite important to understand. We just have those items. This one here is the default camera and direction, but then we have those 1, 2, 3 options. The number 1 option is most like by default, the default option. But as I've explained in the interface, we can change, of course, like the camera direction from there or from here inside. For example, should we take this camera and make it to, I don't know, camera 2? It should trigger also an automation here. This one here should be updated here, as we can see, push in 4 seconds. We can, of course, give it the rating here, but again, we will not use it in this view, but just to display really what fields we have here. The default model and the image URL. This is just a button that references the URL because the URL is looking quite ugly, and we can make it just like a button here. That's nothing else here, but this will be also more useful in the interface itself. We can hide everything which is not important for this view, and that's something which everyone can adjust to their liking here. Same thing, we can move faster here. We have the video ID, we have the video file, URL, task ID, we have the title, shot details, the completion date. This is something which I thought would be useful. I'm not pretty sure if this is useful because we can then set up the duration actually in the external automation and do a reference on that. We have here the storyboard image, which is related to the shot details, the shooting board, the camera and action, the reference to the image that we see, okay, this was the image because the videos, they do not have a thumbnail. That's always helpful to see like in one glance, this clip here is related to this image. And then also here a trigger automation. That's basically only saying, hey, if the video has been created 3 minutes ago and now 3 minutes is over, just write ready to get the video. And then it's generating the URL here. Okay. And then we of course have to give it in the automation status here, we need to create the video. When we go into the image here, that's where we have the status here, create the video. Why are we doing it from the storyboard image view? Is because we want to make sure that the record here is creating, based from this record, a new record in this table and have straight on the right image connected with it. Therefore, we can just take the record with the record ID and fetch that into the linked relationship field here. We have the download URL and then the download button. And this one here was just like a test. We can delete this one here. That has no purpose actually here. In the character, we have the character name As we do not have so many characters, I also don't do a fancy formula field here, but just the name itself with some characteristics and the images we have used to train the model. Should we have like plenty of different characters, we can also automate this step here, but I was not automating this step. This was actually done manually. We have here also the reference of the character here, and then the fine-tune ID, and yeah, the input URL. This is a little bit confusing at first because some model require a fine-tune ID and some others requires you to do ID based on a URL. This is not because I've choose it that way, but because certain models, like even like inside of file, when we choose several Flux models, they have different ways on how you want to give them unique link or ID for your trained model. When you use the Flux LoRa, you want your input here as a URL, but if you are using Flux Pro version 1.1, you need to integrate it with a fine-tune ID. When we create the model, I'll explain this here also more in detail. Of course, you can also have different models. So for example, I have trained also a video model with the same characteristics, same images here that it was trained on. And here we have the unique trained model URL, which we need to trigger the automations, but we will discuss this on the automation. We have the relationship with the shooting board and the external automation and the stories, and here some settings which can be actually also found in the API documentation. For example, here you can change the aspect ratio, you can change how good this image should be, like the steps, and then the amount of images you want to render. But this here is just the reference. We will not use this for the automation itself. It's just for you to understand, okay, for this faceless, we have those items here that we can adjust. That's basically it about the characters. Probably the most complicated table, also the most helpful, because here every automation is running from. And we have two main fields here, and that's like the media generation and the prompt generation. What I mean, what's the difference here is like media, everything that is image, video, or even upscaling or transcripts, etc., is in this field here, in this view, and everything that is text-based, a text completion, like storyboard enhancements, image description, etc., is here in the prompt generation. We have here, let's start with the media generation. We have the name, which is just giving us the number with an ID here, and then the title. We can, of course, hide this one here, as we do not need the ID here as well. Why do we put the number here? Because here we have to be really specific. This one is the backbone, and we cannot afford to have the same name, and like our whole automation is gonna be a mess because we gave it the wrong item. Therefore, we need really here a unique ID, a unique number that we can then use for our automations. Here we have the title. It's just the title so that we have really something that the automations can look into. And then we have the category where we just choose, is it an image generation, a video, image creation, etc. Then should we want our default character to be baked into an automation, we can also integrate the default character here, which I'm not using as much. That's like how I started it. But then right now, the best way is to bake the character straight into the shooting board itself or into the story. We have here the character name, the fine-tune ID or the URL from the character. We have the description. Most of the time you can input just here the API documentation. We have the details. That means like here inside, you can be specific. You can change also here the details because the script, which we are working on the automation, reads the details here. And when you change any values, it will adapt it. For example, you need more than one image or you want a different aspect ratio. You can change the properties here. It will then change the automation also. You can change the model type. This was unfortunately necessary in order to keep the automation really as flexible as possible here. And then the media model, you can choose like what model you want. Like here, any flux models. As you can see, there are quite a lot of flux models already, any video models and so on. This is then connected to the API key, because in order to use any automation tool, you need an API key, which is stored in the credentials table. We will discuss this also on the automation section. Just a status is if this is in use or not, and where this is in use. Like this one is in use inside of Airtable, but if you have another tool which you prefer, you can select n8n, make.com, windmill, whatever. And then you can store here your scripts. This also serves as a documentation hub where you can really see like what models are currently in use, what are like in testing phase, because as we all know, models are changing freaking every single day. We have a new model in every aspect. It just makes sense to combine and to think about a system that allows for flexibility. Again, that's something we will discuss in the automation section. Let's move on to the prompt generation. It's in the same table. We could have separated those two, but at a certain point, it also makes sense to just have it in one table. This is up to you. You can either separate those into two tables because they are not really sharing the same attributes all the time. It's only like a couple of similar attributes, but actually we can treat those also as two tables here, because the way this is structured is completely different. Here we just have the title as before. We have the main categories. Here we just have actually those three: image, video, and every other thing is a utility tool. And then of course text. Then what is this here for? Is it a narrative enhancer, a shooting board? And then we have here some other prompts, which we will not discuss now. And here we can input the elements handling the input. Then we have the role, a skilled expert in XYZ, the task, the example output. And here, sometimes it just makes sense to give the AI a really good example, because the example most of the time is more important than the task itself. When you give the AI a great example, it will follow this example. It tries to understand really like, how was the shot description written here? The framing, the camera level, the camera movement, the camera speed. And when you give a good example, it follows this example and to replicate the example. As I've mentioned before, we have the outcome, which is like a mix between conclusion, excluding items. This one here is more complex. I'll not discuss this, but we have the output type, which either is a single output. We split that. We have like an object where we have multiple outputs, and then we have an array. That means, for example, here, our shooting board items, we have multiple items in one output. So that means like each storyboard description, for example, belongs to an own item. But yeah, that's something maybe we will discuss it in the automation, but not really sure. And then we have here the output structure. This is important also only if like what a JSON object is and how you want to extract the data. Again, here it follows a specific logic. So this here gives basically the script a way to understand like, okay, this is a single output, this is like an object, or this is an array. And based on that, it changes like the way it treats the out. Here we have the full prompt and we have the status. Is it in use? Where is the automation gonna be used? Here directly inside of Airtable or other automation tools. Like after now playing around with so many automation tools, especially like when you do having connected multiple databases, and might be like one of the best automation tools, especially like for no code. But lately I really think like Windmill is even better for those use cases. Here with the AI models, we have the choice of like really hundreds of different models, but keep in mind that is the most frustrating part here, and that consumes the most time. While creating an image and video is super straightforward, the problem is like every provider has a different outcome. And not only that, inside those like providers, when you choose a different model, they also treat everything differently. Like the response from O3 is different than the response from Claude 3.5. Slightly different, because here this is like a reasoning model. So that's why your script is getting longer and longer, because you want to be prepared for every model there is, plus also the providers. I just have 2 providers here because there are more than enough. Actually, 1 provider would be enough. If you choose 1 provider, I would definitely go either with Strico or with OpenRouter here, because those providers, they have every model you can think of. Like the list of AI models you can use is pretty much endless there. Then you connect it with your API key, which I'm not opening right now. Any description, if you want to give it like a short description, what this prompt is doing, some details, script explainer. And this one here is for the tester. If you put an input, you get an output to basically validate, is this prompt here good or not? And then the same thing, record ID, which we can hide, not really useful for only for the automation, and some comments if you like. But we are using the other comment field. Actually, that's something we can also delete here, because when we want to comment on this prompt, as I've shown in the interface view, you can actually use this comment here and open the comment here directly. And this here is not the same comment field. This is just a normal long text field here, which we can close or just delete. Let's move on to the last remaining fields here. I'll keep those tight because I do not want to share, of course, my API keys or any URLs or tokens. This is like a super simple table, but also quite important, because sometimes we want to share any scripts and we do not want to share any API credentials. And when we are talking about the automations, we can see that pulls the name of the app, pulls then the right API key from this credentials table. That means we can have multiple maybe accounts from OpenRouter. Maybe we have multiple people working for the same company, and each department has a different API key. So that means like we can use the same script, we just need to change then really the department. Again, that's maybe more complex and goes a little bit beyond this video here. But here I would share, here we just have the app, the API key alternative. Sometimes we have multiple API keys. Then the token, if it's like needed. In some cases, for example, if I want to work with Windmill, we need a token, the URL or the webhook, some details if we like to include. I'm not showing the full credentials here as those are quite secret. Therefore, I like leave everything blank here for now. But this here is helpful. You might want to include the API documentation for every of those providers here. And then how many automations are actually connected with those providers here, which is then connected. This is not connected to any other field. Last but not least, the inspiration, where we have all those images here, which we can use for inspirational purposes. But since this is not really important for our video pipeline, I'm not discussing here all the images. I'll just include this one in for someone who's interested. And then you can have also all those images with the prompts, camera details, assistant, blah, 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 with all the tags and so on. I'm also including the prompt that generates basically those descriptions. Let's create a table together. We have here a prepared sheet. The idea is to create a transcription table. And we have several ways. I have actually wrote a script that can transform this here into a table. You can also use the Airtable AI, but should you have not the Pro version, this is not working. Therefore, we are doing it completely manual. I know this is the slowest possible way, but we are doing it in a way so that everyone can potentially use this one here. Keep in mind, we have here some helpful attributes we can do. For example, we can hide specific tables. For example, we do not want to showcase the credentials. Here we can hide the table, and also this one, we might hide it. And now what's then possible is, should we have multiple tables or too many tables? They are all stored here inside, but we do not see them visible here. Let's just create, as I said, like copy here some of the fields. We have the transcript ID, which we turn into a formula. But before that, let's just create an ID first. We transform this here into a formula field and name it transcript ID. The formula is quite simple. We just have here also transcript and ID like this. And now what we need here is, of course, like an attachment field. We need the creation date, transcript dates, transcript text. I would always recommend, by the way, to do the table first, like in an overview. You can also ask AI to help you with the overview. That saves really a lot of time later on. Even if I have the script, I would rather prefer it this way instead of asking the AI here and then try to navigate around that. Rather have an overview here where you have all your tables listed and think about it from this perspective, because then you just have to execute, and that saves so much time here. Now what we have is the output. So this one here is where we want our output to be stored. You can just use this one here. Great. Now, while this was fast forwarded, we now just have to integrate here the formula, and then we are done. Again, like this could be simplified by using the AI, but since the AI is not always giving an accurate result, I would rather prefer the script that I've built. But in order to explain it, you can see that it's quite a fast process once you have mapped all the fields out here. And again, like this step here could be also done with the help of a same formula here, also a little timer, where we just give it the time. In our case here, we do like a timer. Is it done like a timer of 1 minute, and then a backup plan in 7 minutes and another backup plan in 10 minutes. But this is not really necessary. We can also keep the formula here quite simple. But again, for that, you can either ask here the AI or just ChatGPT to do that. We have created our field here. We could technically load a transcription, but of course now we have to start to build the automation. So this is the perfect time to switch to our third part, and that's the automation part here. So on our third part, we will talk about the automation, and there are so many different ways on how to do the automation. I've tried to build everything within the automation tab here in Airtable. Of course, you can use make.com, and at the end, it's up to you. In order to understand the decision why I moved everything to Airtable, let's keep it simple. First of all, in order for us to build everything in Make, I believe that would consume more time. And B, when we build it in Make, we are also less flexible. Let's just look into the pre-existing image model here that they have. And we can see that when we are creating here a new file object, which is great that they have a pre-built option here. The only issue is, let's just say we want to generate an image from text. That's the probably most used item or the most used scenario that a file probably is offering. But when we open that, we can see we have really no options here. We have the prompt, we have the request to a webhook, and then we can choose only those models, 1, 2, 3. That's nothing. We can start to map, but I'm not really sure how this is working. In addition to that, we do not have any pre-trained model we can include here. Let's just go back to the other options we have. Here inside, we can start to look for other options. And yes, we can do a manual API call, and we can then input the header here and the body, do it this way. And that would work as well here, but then it's not that more complicated inside of Airtable anymore. While this here seems on first glance maybe a little bit simpler, but in fact, the more models we add, the more complex it's getting. Because then we have to change here also the header type, and we have to implement some logic here. Again, when we do one automation, that might be the choice. But again, think about file and all those other services as a network of different models. Before we talk about the automation, we have to understand this one. Let's talk about file and OpenRouter, because those are quite popular options here. When we think or look into files, catalog, and when we go to file, so in order really to understand what file is, really to understand why this makes no sense, we have to understand what file is and what it's not. File, unlike Runway, is not a service just running Runway. File is more like a service that you can rent just to render your images. That's all they are doing. They just provide servers with pre-installed models. You have here hundreds of options that you can choose from, like text to image to video and so on. You can really go and look for the model you want. They have Flux, they have Kling, they have also an alternative to Whisper, which is absolutely great, because when we compare the pricing from OpenAI Whisper to their text-to-speech model, so they are using this one here, speech-to-text, they are using this model here, and this is by far way cheaper than the Open Whisper model. This is also the model we will use to transcribe our data. Again, think about file as a service that has all those pre-installed models you can choose from, and then you can apply that into your system. But here is really something that I wish would be handled better. Even inside of file, when we look, for example, into their training models here, and when we compare Flux LoRa training and we go, let's just say, to one example here, we see that they want a path from an URL. And when we compare that to, let's say, Flux training, the Pro trainer, what they want here is then a fine-tune ID. Keep in mind that makes a lot of things more complicated. Anyway, that's something I will not dive deep, as this can be more technical, and especially if you want to go into their API documentation, you can look for yourself here. But the same applies actually also for OpenRouter. OpenRouter is amazing because before we had connected maybe OpenAI, but then as we all know, maybe one day later, another model was way cheaper, better, and faster. And then on the next day, another model was again better, faster, and cheaper. When we open here OpenRouter, we can see we have access to a lot of different models here. We can scroll forever, and now we can start comparing. This makes a lot of sense because sometimes we do not need the most advanced model. Sometimes a cheaper, faster model is just more useful. But because I have already a Striko account, I'm using Striko most of the time, which is similar to OpenRouter. We have those two main providers. And knowing that even the models themselves here, we need to use the API anyway, because those pre-built models are not really what we are looking for, as they are not providing the models we are looking for. And also, we have no way to enter it easy. And the only way to access pre-trained model is to use their API module here. But at this point, it's not really simpler than just to write a script, especially with AI. So let's build the automation here. Let's go to external automation and let's give it a name, Transcript. And we can choose the category. We can let it as a utility tool. And now let's just select the model here. In our case, it is this one here. We choose the API key, and this one will be executed directly inside of Airtable. We can import the script and the script explainer, but in order to also visualize that, to create a script also do not require any coding knowledge. Let's just go to the file Whisper documentation. Here we can then go and create and just copy everything here. The only thing we have to take care is really the output. That can generate an error. No worries, we can ask also the AI to get the full raw response in order to prevent an error. And if we are not giving the correct information, then that might take 1 or 2 iterations, but it's actually always quite simple if you just copy everything here and paste it into your AI tool of choice. The only thing we need then to do, and again, you can use any AI tool, is to ask the AI to create 2 scripts, one post and one get script for a transcription automation. And then we can just identify like where do that find the credentials. Because it had already some scripts, it is then generating it easy. I do not have to explain it anymore. You can just use the same logic here. You find the credentials here under File AI. The input table is the transcription. This is like the only thing you have to think about, like where is the input coming and where would we like to save the output. Again, the input table is the transcription table, and the field that it should look into is the transcription file. And then here we can make sure that this is also understood. This is an attachment field. Then we have the task ID. And then we can, of course, also explain it, like you can save your task ID here, but in some cases, we do not even have to explain it. Let's see if it's figuring it out without explaining. We can type in here the table that it finds, like the model that here in 32, we can just identify. You can find the correct model and then output transcription text. And where do we want to display it? On the transcription text field and also in the transcription with time. Now, also really important, if we are not sure how the output is looking like, it will produce most of the time error inside of Airtable. Therefore, what we want to try is to try to catch the full response. Try to catch the full raw response in the console. With that, it should be able to generate a script, and even if not, we can just give the console log and the AI will correct it itself. Again, usually this is even faster than if you would build this entire flow inside of make.com or N8. Let's just press on run. This takes some time, maybe a minute or so, because now it's like trying to understand also the existing scripts. And once you have 1 or 2 or 3 different scripts, it's even faster in the creation itself. Here it looks already, it found the script here, it analyzes the script, and now it's trying to create this script based on an existing script. It's also maintaining the same structure here. So without reading anything here, this is what it has generated. And I'm not reading it. Let's just paste this in and let's see if it's working right out of the batch or if it needs some further adjustments. But we can see it understood like the tables and it understood like the fields, and most of the time the configuration, that's already like half of the things that needs to be correct. And if that's correct, then everything else can be adjusted really simple. Let's just upload here one dummy file and let's start to create the automation from scratch. We go here and enter automation. Since this is a media file, we then can create here an automation, and let's move it to Airtable here. Let's move it here to Airtable down here. And I would also give it the same name. Here we go. For this automation, let's include multiple automation here inside. I do not want to but again, I want just to show you how simple it can. For this automation type, the easiest, of course, would be just if a record matched a condition. But let's choose something more complex here to show you that this is also possible. When a record is updated, let's just use this one here, and let's choose the table transcription. And here we can select the transcript file. This is like a trigger, and also the automation status. That's fine for now. And let's now add conditional logic here. Again, this doesn't need to be that complicated, but I want just to explain that you can do it here inside also. Let's make this here smaller. And now let's just create a simple condition that says, okay, if the transcript file here is not empty, then you can start to trigger. Again, pretty simple. We go here and input the script. We copy the script, paste it, and the only thing we have to think about is the script doesn't know what record it should process. And you can see it here also that we need to identify the record ID. I will not explain now really extensive what the script is and how to work with it. I'll create another video for it if you are interested. But as of now, let's keep it really basic here. The only thing you have to remember is to copy the record ID here, because that has to be identical for the input value. Here we have the name, that's the same name here. And now we want to give it a value, and the value will be the record ID. Let's see if it's working straight without any adjustments, without looking into the script. And we can test the action here. And now it gives this error. That's good that we got this error here, because now we can just take and copy and paste this here into our code builder here. And you can see really maybe this takes 1 or 2 iterations. Or if you understand just a tiny bit, you can also go into the script here. Let's see what it's doing here. Let's test this. Awesome. We have it here. And let's just double check here. We have the task ID, and that's all we need. We can move on to the next step. And here what we want is if the task ID is not empty, because we need the task ID, and we need the status here, automation status is get transcript. Oh, by the way, there is a little mistake. Let's just fix this one here quick. If that's the case, then we want to get the transcript. Here, the same thing. We paste the script here that looks like this time. We take the task ID and then fetch the information here. So now let's do the same, but this time we want to get the transcript. We paste the transcript here. This is looking something like this. Look into this field here with the task ID and paste it here in those field, the outcome. Same thing, we want the record ID, and let's test this one, if it's working or not. That's then something you can then paste in. Again, like this might take you 1 or 2 iterations, but you can really try, and most of the time it's really the output. They understand the API documentation, but it's not able to understand the output. Let's just try to catch the full output here. I just gave it here, this one here, this error record, and now it's trying to get the full output, the full response, instead of trying to fetch it directly, because it seems not to understand like how the script is coming. Let's test it again. And this time, that's what we want. Again, it was not able to fetch it, but at least we have what is important here. We know the script is finished, but it was not able to get it. We do the same thing, we copy it, and basically the AI will provide us with the finished code here. Let's change that. And here we go. It worked. Let's go to the data. We have here the transcription with basically the time. Now, you can be more accurate, but I think this is fine enough. When it comes to the language, I have not put any language here, but you can, of course, give your input language. That makes it for the transcription even easier here. It seems that there might be some, not really sure here if that's correct. Anyway, but I think this is fine for now. And now the only thing we need, of course, is the automation status updates here. Let's move on here. In order to make this work, what we need here is the logic. If the transcript URL is not empty, then trigger this one here. But keep in mind, this automation here is super useful, but also more complicated. The one thing that makes this automation step here a little bit more complicated than if we would choose another trigger, that means, for example, if the transcript URL is not empty, which is almost the entire case, it runs this automation here. That means we have to keep that in mind. Here inside, we need to modify this a little bit and give it, for example, another condition. If the transcript URL is not empty, then, let's just say the status is, once we trigger the automation, we can then update the status here. For that, we go to the transcription, choose the record ID, choose the automation field here, and say, you know what, we just posted the transcript. This will be then enough. It will not be triggered anymore because now we have already selected the status here. Post transcript is done. But before we get the transcript, what we want here is add another condition here. Again, this is a little bit overkill. We can simplify it. It's just to give you a perspective of like that we can really do also some more advanced logic here, which is absolutely great. We do the same. And now what we want to do is like trigger this one here if the status contains post. But now what we want is to add a field here, another trigger field, which is this one here, transcript. This here will act also as a trigger field. So every time the post status on post, and let's just go here and grab the value every time it's ready. So what we want to do here is enhance a bit the condition here. Every time the automation status is post transcript, and for example here on the get transcription contains ready, then we change the status here and update the record into this here. Wait until we have here the ready symbol, and then it's trying to get the transcript. There is a way simpler method which we can apply. If we go here to the API documentation, there is this method here which says if you have a longer process time, you might want to use the webhook. I think for now this is a little bit too complicated, but what you need to give the script is basically a way that once the script is done, you then can generate or send it to this webhook. The only thing you have to do here is, for example, if you create an automation, you can then take the webhook here and send it also to the request. But as I said, that's not what we do now, but I'll show you another example where we use that. What we have here is the transcript URL. If it's not empty, then it's triggering the automation. It's then creating a ID. It's waiting a little bit, and then it's getting the transcript. And once the transcript is done, we can add another condition here where it says when, let's just say the transcript text here contains something and the status was get. So now it's not empty, or we can also choose here is not empty and the transcript status was get. Then we just update the record here and say the automation status of the transcript is done. So quite simple. Keep in mind that from here to there, nothing really happened because the automation status of all those fields might only if they change, that's the only time it's also start to trigger. For example, when the status here is get transcript, then the status is not changing. Therefore, there will be no trigger, and that makes it complicated. Again, you can try it out and figure out if you understand this one here. Otherwise, we just check into the other automations, which are a little bit easier to understand. Let's just turn this on. And now we have built our automation workflow. Let's just test it one more time. Uploaded a file here, and we will not wait until the transcript is completed, but we hope that it's generating at least a task ID and updates the status here. Here we go. The task ID was created. We know it's posting. Okay. And now it's waiting, as I said, like maybe a minute or so until it show the status here ready. Sometimes, even though we mention a minute, the problem is like it takes most of the time not a minute, but longer than a minute. But that's because in that case, we can wait. Or let's just wait here. I'll let the video on. In the meantime, we can just check if the automation is working. While it was loading, something happened with the recording. I thought I can just speed it up, but anyway, it was completed. And I've also worked on the next part of it. I just included here a little summary script, and what it's doing, it's basically going here into my external automations table, look for the prompt here inside, and generate a title for the transcript and a summary. And this is saved here in the output. There are two different methods. We can either save it here or fetch it directly into the table itself. But for demonstration purposes, I'm saving it here. The output is looking something like this here, but in order to make it visually easier to extract. It's also saved here as title and summary. And we can then, after we are getting the transcript and the transcript is done, something else is running, and this is the script. And as I said, we can usually paste it directly into the table. We do not need to update the record, but in that case, this is also easier to understand, but that requires another update block here. So that means like here or down here below, we store the output here for the subsequence. That's what we need to do. Then we of course can update the record here based on the record ID. We can then put the title, which we can choose. So here from the script, we go to the title. We do not need the full output here. And then of course, paste the summary. That's it. We are done with the entire flow here of the transcript. As you can see, that requires somewhat of playing around, some knowledge. And as I said, if you're interested in a more dedicated script tutorial, that usually takes maybe 30 to 60 minutes to get the basic understanding, which I'm not covering in this video here. And for those who can write script, this will be anyway. The only thing you need to remember is really try to think what are your input fields and what are your output fields here. Let's move on and let's discuss the automations here that we have a grand overview what's going on. First of all, let's start here with the narrative enhancer. We have the same principle. This time the automation is way simpler. We do not follow any conditional logic here. It's just simple. When we press this button and the categories prompt is not empty because we choose, like some narrative enhancement, then we run the script here. So it's not just posting it, but it's posting and getting the script. When we open the script here, we can check here that the same method with the record ID. We get here the prompt name. We look inside the stories for the narrative field, and there inside we then pull basically the narrative enhancer. In this case, it's 26 horror enhancement. And what it's doing, it's sending the full prompt here. And this is basically how the information text-wise is gonna be processed. This is not looking as great as if we would do that, of course, like inside of make.com. But again, the advantage is we can be really flexible here. When we think about make.com, then we can of course also get OpenRouter here. And this is good as this is technically the same. And of course we can have also ways on how the script will be more or less flexible. But the more we understand that the input data can come from very different tables, the more we also realize that in order to make it flexible, we need to include here a lot of modules. Not only that, but let's just say when we open OpenRouter here, the script itself cannot process the information. We will always have only the raw response. That means we need to include a text model anyway. In Airtable, on the other hand, we have it all here inside the script. Think about the script is literally a chain of different modules. We are not just more flexible, but at the same time, we are extracting the data and we are phrasing it already in the right format here. We have the summary here and we have the story, as we can see. And not only that, but it's also fetched already into Airtable here. That's something, again, I'm not discussing here in this video, but when you chat with GPT, it's actually quite simple. I just made it a little bit more complex to be more flexible. Why? This here makes it really flexible, but at the same time also more complicated. The prompts themselves are not predefined. As we can see, the value here of the input is a variable. But what we can see also, the task, the example output, and the outcome are not set. Those items here are really flexible. That allows us really to change the message here that we are sending to the provider. In order to demonstrate this one here, let's just write this here and change this one so that we see the behavior here. As I've mentioned before, once set up, you do not really need to take care. You can really just stay here inside your interface view and play around with those items. You can change the model, you can change the prompt, all here inside. And once you understand the concept here, you can literally just change all the models at the same time. That saves a lot of time. We are always flexible here because again, yesterday it was DeepSeek, today it's O3, and tomorrow, who knows? Like, we want to be flexible. And when we look here at the prompt, they are not baked in. Once we have the script here and we change this one here, and let's just do something stupid here. Let's just take this out here and let's just write "you are stupid" to make it really obvious. Let's just send the same test here and let's do here, I don't know, the live test one. Oh, wait a moment, that's the wrong. We need, of course, the same where the category was also horror. Let's choose here a record, this one here. And when we send the script, as we saw, we just change here our role. And when we got the role, which makes no sense at all, but again, like for demonstration purposes, we just wrote here, "you are stupid." And in our prompt, we change it. We are really flexible. And I hope that this makes you understand why this is powerful, because we do not have to build those massive workflows. It's all here inside and it's doing everything at the same time. It's sending the prompt, we receive the prompt, we extract the prompt, we fetch the prompt, all in one script. That would be when we would build that in make.com. Probably 5 to 10 different single modules in one go. And when we think about like more complex, for example, creating the storyboard, that would be even more modules here. In that sense, it really makes a lot of sense to build something like that, maybe already inside of Airtable. But of course, you can just choose whatever platform you like. If you prefer n8n, go ahead and work there. It's also an amazing automation tool. But as we can see, it was working. But let's change it back here. And when we send the same script, it should apply the role here. And we can then also change the model, whatever model we like. And that's making it so powerful. We are not just limited here to OpenAI, but we can go to Anthropic, we can choose Qwen, we can choose DeepSeek, we can even choose another provider here. We see the prompt, we see the results, and everything is working fine here. Let's move on to the next one here. This one here is just a fallback option. In some cases, we might have like a raw response which was not processed correctly. As I said, like O3 models are handling things, for example, or the O series are handling things a little bit differently, and therefore the providers are sending a different output. For that, you can of course also include any backup options here, where you can just take the raw response and ask GPT, hey, you know what? Can you please transform that into the output I'm looking for? Again, this is just a backup option. When we go here to the next script, it looks more complicated, but actually it's not. It's just saying like when we want to create a storyboard, the enhanced narrative is not empty and we have selected the small shooting board, then please look into our default model. Again, this here is the default image enhancer. Look for it so we can change it here easily, and also look for the default image model. We have here the image enhancer and the default image model, which we can change here inside. We could do that straight in the script, but for someone not technical, I thought this is a better method. When you want to enhance or change your default model and you do not want the model to be pre-selected all the time, and this is not the model you want, you can just paste it here inside and you have a different default model. Keep in mind, you can always change it also later on. That should be not a problem. And then the script is running It's the same principle. Once you understood, like you can copy and paste the script here really. The only thing that is different maybe is that some scripts include also the values, because sometimes it just makes sense to see that also, or to process the value differently. For example, here we have those values, the camera speed, camera movement, and so on and so on. And we store them here inside and update the record here for each item. It's doing here a list of those single items that it has created here, 15 items, and then creating for each item a unique shot description, framing, and so on and so on. Keep in mind, this is not necessary. We can do that all in the script. The reason why I've done it this way, even though it consumed maybe more credits, is it's easier to handle should there be an error. Again, different models act differently, and we capture here everything. So that means here in the content, we capture basically the content itself. You will most likely do less errors if you do it this way, instead of trying to fetch it directly into your tables. For the last prompt here, this is like the image enhancement only. We take prompt, again, similar style. Once we understand the style, we can just copy it for every prompt. We can adjust, we can technically copy the entire script here, ask GPT, you know what, change the prompt here. I do not want number 15, but maybe number 17 in this automation. And that's why I've also explained on how you can build your own automation here. For someone new to that, that might be complicated. Again, you need your time, but you can really try to understand the system here first and then just adjust it to your liking. What is happening here? This here, again, a more complicated automation. Why? Because we have here conditional logic again. If we press run with a and the automation phase is empty, then update it and make it start. Why is this important? Because in our interface, we have the option to redo it. The redo button here is basically setting the status back to enhance prompt again. Let's just check this one so that we also understand what's going on. This button here is just doing one thing. It's updating the record and put the status here of the automation back to prompt description. That's the whole purpose of this button. Therefore, this here will not be activated because the status will never be empty again. Once this is triggered, it goes straight here into the action. And we can repeat it as many times as we like. So we can kind of like do it and enhance it as many times as we like until we are done. And then it's doing nothing, of course. Let's talk about the image generation. And this one was the only script that took me a little bit longer. Why? Because in the beginning, I did a script and tried to split the script here by creating a flux image. And as I've mentioned already multiple times, they have different requirements. And I wanted to combine those into one script. And that made it a little bit complicated. I had to figure out like why certain things are not happening. I had to talk with the AI probably for 10 or maybe 15 minutes to get this thing working. Yeah, it can take sometimes that long, but most of the time it's actually, you can, once you understand the principles of the script, you can get the things faster done. What it's doing here, it's having both. You have both options here. So you can generate the image, but you have options. You can either go with LoRa or with the Pro model here. It really can handle both. Here, the results also is just saving the image URL, which we can then fetch later on. And that's basically what it's doing here. And as we can see, we have all the information. This is the enhanced prompt. And the only difference here is same thing. We can create as many items as we like. But the only difference here is this prompt, we send it with the enhanced prompt, and here without the enhanced prompt. The input fields are looking quite different. And as we can see here, we have the camera angle, the framing, the shot description, the camera angle, the framing, and that's what we are sending here. And on the other side, when we check this one, it doesn't include all those input fields. The only field it includes here in comparison is the enhanced image prompt, because that's like sent on with the enhanced version here. Let's talk about the final automations here, because I think the others are not relevant in this video here, because they are just like normal database automations, like if statuses are changing or if we apply certain things on the interface. But let's just talk about the image to video here. Same thing, but here I have created two options. The options we have used before for the transcript with the timer. So same principle here, but this is a more advanced script. We send the script here with a webhook. That means when the video is done, we do not set a timer in order to get that. We wait until we receive something. File themselves, they are sending it. We do not have to set any timer. We do not need to predict when it's gonna be done or anything. The webhook will do it on its own. Like once the script is done, it will send it directly. We catch it, and here is the only issue, but that's easy to solve. You, of course, just get like the request ID and not the record ID. But in order for you to process the entire script, you need the record ID. So here you get, the only thing you receive is like the URL and the file size and the file name, which is not relevant here. Based on the request ID, which we have fetched in the step before, based on this script here, we fetch the request ID already, and we can look for it. Here, we can look for the request ID. Let's just test this one here. And based on the request ID or the task ID, we can then get the record ID. Based on the record ID and the webhook data, we can get the URL and fetch it into our existing record. Because again, the automation is working this way. Inside the storyboard image, when we press on run the automation, what's happening is it's change the automation phase to start. Then when we press this button and it's on start, it then triggers, and we take here, when we trigger this one, we take the record ID and fetch it into a new created field. We not only send the request here, but we also create directly in the video table a new field. I hope that was enough to get a basic understanding why we are using the internal scripts here, but also that you can technically do everything inside of Airtable. As I said, this will not cover the entire script course, because it's really more of understanding the pipeline and what automations we have here. And also that there are more automations which we cannot talk about, right? Because that would just like be a way too long video. But we have like, of course, not just Flux automations, but we can integrate then also like runway, same thing. We can go here, same principle, just another, different way here. Again, in our external automation, we find this post method here, and then we start to post it. We get the URL back. Similar, same, but different. And again, all of those scripts has been generated by AI. You just need to figure out really on how to get started. Once you get the hang of it, it's quite simple.